Okay, so I need to tell you about the most ridiculous situation that happened to me. And honestly, I'm still processing it all. My name's Sabrina and I'm 24. And let me just start by saying that men are absolutely unreal when it comes to handling anything that doesn't fit their perfect little fantasy. They build you up into this pristine image in their heads, and the second they discover you're a real, complex human being with a past, they shatter. It's pathetic, really. I was dating this guy, Grant, for about 5 months. He's 29, works in logistics management, some respectable, stable thing, and for a while, everything was amazing. Genuinely amazing. Then, he completely lost his mind over something that had nothing to do with our actual relationship. But let me back up, because this whole thing is just so typical of how guys think they can control every aspect of a woman's life, past and present. I met Grant through some mutual friends at a backyard barbecue. It was one of those rare occasions where I wasn't even looking. I was so tired of the usual losers I'd been dating. The guys who lived with 3 roommates, whose idea of a big night was splitting a cheap pizza, the ones who spent more time on dating apps than on their actual careers. Grant seemed different. He had his own place, a nicely furnished 2-bedroom condo that screamed adult. He seemed to have his finances together, drove a decent car, and wasn't trying to play games or waste my time with stupid, ambiguous texts. He was direct. I liked that. When we started hanging out more seriously, he was actually generous and thoughtful. He always insisted on paying for dates, taking me to nice restaurants, and treating me well. I was impressed because most guys my age are broke or cheap or both. So, finding someone who understood how to treat a woman properly was refreshing. He had this old-fashioned charm about him that felt secure and comforting. The thing is, I'd been doing some online content creation for about 2 years before I met him. Nothing crazy or anything, just some curated photo sets and videos to make extra money. Let's be real, regular jobs don't pay enough to actually live on anymore, not if you want to have a life. It was good money, and I was smart about it. I built up a solid subscriber base, and was making more than most of my friends with their boring 9-to-5 office jobs. It gave me freedom. But obviously, when you start getting serious with someone, you have to think about the future and what you actually want your life to look like long term. So after we'd been together for a few months and things were getting more serious, I started dropping hints about wanting a more traditional relationship dynamic. I wasn't lying. A part of me was tired of the hustle. I'd mentioned how nice it would be to have a partner who could provide while I focused on making a real home for us. Grant seemed really into this idea. He'd talk about how he'd always wanted a wife who would be there for him after a long day at work, and how modern relationships felt too complicated and competitive. He'd grown up with parents who had more traditional roles. His dad worked, his mom was a homemaker, and he respected that dynamic. He saw it as a partnership where each person had a defined, valuable role. It was perfect. I started positioning myself as exactly what he wanted. When I'd stay over at his place, I'd cook his favorite dinners and tidy up, make sure he had everything he needed. I'd listen to him talk for hours about work stress and be supportive, never making it about me or complaining about my own day. I poured myself into the role of the perfect, nurturing girlfriend. I could tell he appreciated it. He loved having someone who actually cared about his comfort and happiness, instead of just expecting him to be some entertainment source or a walking wallet. The online thing was still happening during all this, of course, but I was already mentally planning my exit strategy. It wasn't a career I was passionate about. It was a means to an end. I figured once we moved in together and I didn't need the extra income, I'd gradually wind it down. It wasn't like I was emotionally invested in those subscribers or anything. It was purely business, a transaction. I was careful to keep that part of my life completely separate from the beautiful, real thing Grant and I had together. When we had the conversation about me potentially moving in with him, I presented the whole traditional wife concept in a way that sounded romantic and appealing, not lazy or opportunistic. I told him I wanted to be the kind of woman who could take care of our home while he handled the financial responsibilities. I said I thought relationships worked better when people had defined roles instead of constantly competing with each other. He seemed genuinely excited about the idea. He held my hands, looked me in the eyes, and said it was everything he'd ever wanted. He even started talking about maybe planning a special trip for us, a way to celebrate this new phase of our relationship. That's when he mentioned Bali, an amazing 10-day vacation he wanted to take me on. I was ecstatic. It felt like confirmation that he was serious about our future together. Here was this guy who was willing to spend real money on creating memories with me, who wanted to invest in our relationship instead of just keeping things casual and convenient. Everything seemed to be falling into place exactly how I'd hoped. I felt like I'd finally found someone who understood what I could offer and valued it properly. I was on the cusp of having the life I deserved. The night before everything went sideways, we were having this perfect evening together. It was the kind of night that felt like a movie scene. We were lying in his bed, just being lazy, scrolling through a food delivery app trying to decide what to order for dinner. I was doing my nails, a bright coral color I'd chosen specifically for our trip, because I wanted them to look good in all the photos we were going to take on the beaches of Bali. It was one of those comfortable domestic moments where you're just enjoying being with someone without needing to do anything special. Grant offered to handle ordering the food so I could focus on my nails. "Give me your phone, I'll get it," he said, leaning over to kiss my temple. I handed it to him without even thinking about it, my thumb already on the sensor to unlock it. It was a gesture of complete trust. I noticed him pause for a second while he was scrolling through the app, his thumb hovering over the screen, but I was concentrating on getting my nail polish even and didn't pay much attention. Maybe a notification had popped up. Who knew? He seemed to take longer than usual to place the order, but I figured he was just being indecisive about toppings. When the pizza finally arrived, though, something felt different about his energy. He wasn't as talkative during dinner. He was usually so engaged, asking about my day, telling me funny stories about his coworkers. Tonight, he just gave shorter responses when I tried to chat about our trip plans. "Are you excited about the villa?" "I saw it has a private infinity pool," I said, trying to draw him out. "Yeah, sounds nice," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the television. When I asked if everything was okay, he just said work had been stressful and he was tired. It made sense. He'd been putting in extra hours to clear his desk before taking 10 days off, so I didn't push it. We watched some television and went to bed early, but I could tell something was bothering him. He seemed distracted and kept checking his phone, which wasn't like him at all during our time together. He usually made a point of putting it away when we were in bed. I woke up in the middle of the night and realized he was awake too, just staring at the ceiling, the faint blue light of his phone screen casting shadows on his face. When I asked what was wrong, he said he couldn't sleep, just thinking about work stuff. I tried to cuddle with him and help him relax, rubbing his back gently, but he seemed tense and distant. He didn't pull me closer like he normally would. I figured the stress of taking time off was really getting to him, which happens to people who take their job responsibilities seriously. It was another sign of his maturity, I told myself. The next morning was even weirder. Grant was up before me, which never happened. Usually, our mornings were really sweet and intimate, full of soft kisses and lazy conversation. But he was already dressed and drinking coffee in the kitchen when I came out of the bedroom. He barely looked up from his phone when I said good morning. "Morning," he said, his voice flat. When I tried to talk about our flight later that day, and how excited I was, he just nodded and said, "Yeah, we'll figure it out." Figure it out? What was there to figure out? Everything was booked. I spent the morning running last-minute errands, trying to shake off the growing unease. I got my nails touched up again at the salon, picked up a few new outfits I thought would look good in photos, and made sure I had everything packed perfectly. I wanted this trip to be flawless. I kept texting Grant updates about my day, sending him pictures of a sun hat I bought, asking if he needed me to grab anything for him. His responses were really short, one-word answers that didn't match his usual enthusiasm at all. The anxiety in my stomach was starting to feel like a lead weight. By the time I got home that afternoon, I was starting to feel genuinely anxious about his mood. He was already there when I arrived, which was unusual since he normally worked later. When I walked in, he was sitting on the couch with this really calm, focused expression that I'd never seen before. It wasn't angry, exactly, but it was intense in a way that made my skin crawl. The television was off. The apartment was silent. It felt like the air before a storm. He looked up as I closed the door, his eyes unblinking. "Hey," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We need to talk before we leave for the airport." My first thought, absurdly, was that maybe he was planning to propose during our trip and was nervous about it. A pre-proposal talk? But something about his tone, the cold finality of it, made me realize this wasn't going to be a romantic conversation. I sat down on the armchair opposite him, still clutching my shopping bags, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I was still hoping everything was fine, that this was just some monumental work stress, but I could feel that something major was about to happen. Grant started asking me these really specific questions about my past. "What were you doing for work before we got together?" he asked, his voice even. "How were you supporting yourself?" At first, I thought he was just curious, maybe trying to understand my background better as we prepared to take this big step. So, I gave him general answers. "Oh, just bouncing between different jobs, retail, waitressing, figuring things out like everyone else does." I kept it vague. But then his questions got more pointed. "Is there anything important about your past that I should know about, Sabrina?" I started getting defensive. It felt like he was interrogating me instead of just having a normal conversation. "My past doesn't matter, Grant. We're building a future together. I don't understand why you're questioning me like this right now, when we should be getting ready for our romantic vacation." The whole thing felt like he was trying to catch me in some kind of lie, which was insulting. I'd never given him any reason not to trust me. I had been the perfect girlfriend. Then he asked it. "Do you have any online accounts? Any profiles or activities that I don't know about?" That's when I started to panic. A cold dread washed over me. He knew, or he suspected. How could he? I tried to stay calm, to turn it back on him. "Why are you being so suspicious? Don't you trust me?" I tried to make my voice tremble a little. "This is really hurtful, especially right before we're supposed to leave for this special trip you planned for us." Grant kept pressing, though, his calm demeanor never wavering. "Are you hiding anything from me, Sabrina?" I could tell he already knew something, but I wasn't sure how much. I tried to deflect by getting emotional, telling him that it hurt my feelings that he would doubt me like this. I asked him why he was choosing to have this conversation now, instead of just enjoying our relationship and looking forward to our future together. The whole time, he stayed completely calm, which actually made me more nervous than if he'd been yelling. He had this controlled way of speaking that made it clear he'd been thinking about this conversation for a while. That's when he pulled out his phone. He didn't need to say a word. He just turned the screen towards me, and I saw them. Screenshots of my own messages. He had actual screenshots of conversations from my content account, including timestamps that were from just a few days ago. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I realized he'd been doing detective work instead of just talking to me like a normal person. He'd gone through my phone the night before when I let him order food, seen a notification or something, and then spent hours investigating me behind my back. I immediately tried to do damage control. "Okay, look," I started, my voice shaking for real this time. "Most of that content is old. I'm not really active anymore. I was just keeping the account open to let my remaining subscribers know I was transitioning out of that phase of my life." But then he swiped, showing me more evidence. Messages where I'd been responding to people just a few days earlier. A message where I promised new content would be uploaded soon. I felt completely trapped. There was no way to explain that away. Then, he told me the worst part. "I wanted to be sure," he said, his voice flat as a dial tone. "So last night, I created a fake account. I messaged you with a request for custom content." He looked right at me. "You responded within 15 minutes, offering exactly what I'd asked for. Funny, you always take an hour to text me back, but a potential customer gets an instant reply." I felt so stupid, so utterly, completely stupid for falling into that trap. But how was I supposed to know it was him? My shock quickly morphed into anger. This was entrapment. How could you deceive me like that? I shot back, my voice rising. "Going behind my back? Setting up fake accounts to spy on me? What you did was manipulative. It shows you didn't trust me enough to just have an honest conversation." I tried to flip it back on him, to make him the villain. Grant stayed completely calm, which made me even more frustrated. "You want to talk about deception, Sabrina?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "You've spent months building this fantasy of being the perfect traditional woman, while actively lying to my face about who you are and what you do for a living." He stood up. "The trip is canceled. I need you to get your things and leave my house." I literally couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're seriously going to throw away our entire relationship over something that has nothing to do with us personally?" "It was just a job, Grant. It didn't mean anything. I told him he was being dramatic and unreasonable, that this was exactly the kind of overreaction that ruins good relationships. But I could see it in his face. He'd already decided. Nothing I said was going to change his mind. The man I thought I was building a future with had become a cold, stone-faced stranger. The next few hours were absolutely surreal. I had to pack up all my stuff, the clothes in his closet, the toiletries in his bathroom, all the little bits of my life that had seeped into his while Grant just sat there on the couch, watching me in silence. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just empty. I kept trying to talk to him, to make him see how crazy this whole situation was. I pleaded, I cried, I got angry again, but he wouldn't engage. It was like talking to a brick wall. When I finally finished packing, dragging my suitcase and bags to the door, he literally walked me to it and held it open. "Don't contact me again, Sabrina," was all he said. Then I heard the locks click behind me, one by one. I was standing on his porch with my bags like some kind of rejected delivery. I tried calling and texting him immediately, my hands trembling, but the calls went straight to voicemail and the texts wouldn't deliver. He'd already blocked my number. I couldn't believe someone could just cut off all communication like that after 5 months together, after talking about a future, after planning a trip to Bali. I had to call my mom to come pick me up. Trying to explain why I was suddenly homeless without telling her the whole humiliating truth was one of the worst moments of my life. She kept asking what had happened, and I had to make up some vague story about a misunderstanding that got blown completely out of proportion. Moving back into my childhood bedroom at 24, with its faded posters on the wall and twin-sized bed, felt like the ultimate failure. For the first few days, I kept expecting Grant to call. I was sure he would cool down, realize he'd overreacted, and want to talk things through like adults. But my phone stayed silent. The silence was deafening. I started reaching out to our mutual friends, hoping someone could talk some sense into him or at least find out what he was thinking. I had to be careful with my story. I presented the situation as a tragic misunderstanding, telling them that Grant had discovered something from my past work I used to do and freaked out instead of just talking to me about it. Most of our friends seemed confused and sympathetic, which was frustrating because I couldn't explain the full details without making myself look bad. I had to keep things vague. Some of them tried to reach out to him for me, but apparently, he wasn't talking to anyone about what had happened. He had completely shut down. And then came the worst part. The part that turned my grief into pure, unadulterated rage. I was scrolling through social media, torturing myself by looking at his profile when I saw it. He'd actually gone on our trip by himself. He was in Bali. He posted a picture of himself holding a beer, smiling, with the stunning sunset over the ocean in the background. It was the exact view from the villa he had booked for us. Over the next week, he kept posting. Pictures of the rice paddies, the temples, the food, all the places we were supposed to visit together. The photos made it clear he was having an amazing time without me, like I'd never been part of the plan at all. Seeing him enjoying our romantic vacation solo made me feel completely disposable. It was like I was so easy to replace that he didn't even need to reschedule the trip. He just deleted me from the itinerary and moved on. That's when my sadness curdled into something much harder and colder. I started telling my friends and family that Grant had dumped me over something trivial from my past, making him sound controlling and judgmental. I painted myself as the victim of a man who couldn't accept that people have complicated histories. Most people were sympathetic, especially when I cried about how much I missed him and how unfair the whole situation was. But I was also getting angrier with every day that passed without hearing from him. Here I was, heartbroken and displaced, living in my teenage bedroom, while he was living his best life in paradise. It felt like he'd gotten to play judge, jury, and executioner with my life choices, then moved on without any consequences for himself. I started to think that if he wanted to treat me like I was disposable, maybe I should stop trying to fix things and start focusing on making him understand what he'd lost. He needed to feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused me. That's when I decided to call his mother. I figured if anyone could talk sense into him, it would be family. I had met her a few times, and she had always been so warm and kind to me. She'd even said I was a good influence on Grant. I found her number in my contacts and took a deep breath. I called her crying, a calculated performance of heartbreak. I explained that I was devastated and couldn't understand why Grant was being so cruel to me. I told her that I'd made some mistakes in my past, long before I met him, but that I loved her son dearly and wanted to make things right. I made it sound like he was punishing me for things that happened years ago, which wasn't technically a lie. It was just a strategic omission of recent events. His mom, Carol, seemed genuinely sympathetic at first. "Oh, Sabrina dear, I'm so sorry to hear this," she said, her voice full of concern. "She told me she'd always liked me and thought Grant and I were so good together. She promised to talk to him as soon as he got back from his trip and see if she could help us work things out." I hung up feeling hopeful for the first time in days. I thought that maybe some family pressure would make him realize he was being unreasonable and cruel, but that plan completely backfired. A few days later, I got an angry call from Carol. Her tone was like ice. "Sabrina, I need you to stop contacting our family and leave Grant alone," she said, her voice sharp with fury. Apparently, Grant had returned and told her the full truth about what he discovered. He hadn't just told her, he had shown her. He showed her the screenshots, the fake account, some of the content I'd been creating. "I am disgusted," she spat through the phone. "I cannot believe you were deceiving my son this entire time while pretending you wanted a traditional life with him. You are not the person I thought you were." I was furious that Grant had shared such private, personal information about me with his family. It felt like such a violation, taking something embarrassing and spreading it around to people who had no business knowing about it. I tried to explain to his mother that it was just business and that I'd been planning to stop, but she hung up on me before I could finish. That phone call made me realize that Grant wasn't just ending our relationship. He was actively trying to destroy my reputation and make sure I couldn't get support from anyone who knew both of us. He was being vindictive. He could have just handled things privately between us, but instead, he chose to humiliate me. The final breaking point came about 6 weeks after he'd kicked me out. I was at the grocery store, feeling miserable, when I saw him. He was with someone new. A girl who looked completely different from me, so wholesome and sweet, with a girl next door vibe. She was laughing at something he'd said, and they looked so comfortable together, like they'd been dating for months. Seeing him replace me so quickly, so easily, made me realize that everything we'd had together had meant nothing to him. I was just a placeholder. That night, I decided I was done being the bigger person. If Grant wanted to treat me like garbage and move on like I'd never mattered, then it was time for him to face some consequences for his actions. I called my 2 closest friends, Chloe and Ava, and told them I needed their help with something important. I was tired of being the only one suffering while he got to act like the blameless victim in this whole situation. We decided to wait for him outside his house one evening when he got home from work. My plan was just to confront him face to face, to make him explain why he thought it was okay to treat me so badly. When he pulled into his driveway, we approached his car before he could get inside. He saw us, and his face hardened into a mask of indifference. I tried to talk to him, my voice shaking with a mixture of hurt and rage. "Grant, you owe me an explanation. You can't just throw me away like this." I demanded that he at least have the decency to face me. But he just ignored us completely, walking past us toward his front door as if we were invisible. Seeing him dismiss me like I was some random stranger made me absolutely furious. After everything we'd shared together, after all the time and emotion I'd invested in our relationship, he couldn't even acknowledge my existence. I started raising my voice, calling him a coward for refusing to face me. But he just went inside and closed the door. We heard the lock click again. That's when my anger took over completely. My friends were just as outraged as I was. "No one deserves to be treated with such disrespect," Chloe said, her eyes flashing. We ended up taking our frustration out on his property. We found some decorative rocks in his landscaping, and in a blind fury, we started throwing them. We hit his front door, leaving deep dents in the wood. One rock hit a front window, and the sound of breaking glass was both shocking and deeply, satisfyingly cathartic. It felt good in the moment to finally get some kind of reaction, even if it was just the sound of his perfect life shattering a little. We left feeling like we'd finally stood up for ourselves, like we had made a statement. I thought that maybe now he'd realize he couldn't just pretend I didn't exist. For a few days, I felt a strange sense of satisfied justice. I believed we'd gotten some kind of retribution for how badly he'd treated me. The sound of that window breaking echoed in my mind as a small victory. But then the police called. Apparently, Grant had security cameras. Of course he did. He was the kind of person who had everything in order, everything protected. The police officer on the phone informed me that they had clear footage of everything we'd done 3 women, clearly identifiable, damaging his property. He said I was being charged with vandalism and trespassing, and that I'd need to appear in court. I tried to explain my side of the story, that it was just a relationship dispute that had gotten out of hand, that he'd provoked us by being so cruel and dismissive. The officer was unmoved. "Ma'am," he said tiredly, "property damage is a criminal matter, regardless of the circumstances." Suddenly, my life spiraled out of control. I had to hire a lawyer, which used up most of the savings I had carefully built from my online work. The legal process dragged on for months. I had to keep appearing in court, dressed in my most conservative outfits, trying to look remorseful and responsible, all while trying to keep my family from finding out the full extent of what had happened. They knew about the breakup, but not the criminal charges. The stress of everything made it almost impossible to maintain my online work. It's hard to create appealing content when you feel like your life is falling apart. I started losing subscribers because my posts became sporadic and my attitude was obviously affected. The very thing I was trying to transition away from was now my only source of income, and it was crumbling. The worst part was watching Grant continue to thrive. His new girlfriend seemed to be getting more serious with him. I'd see them tagged in photos together on social media, looking happy and untroubled. His life was going perfectly. Meanwhile, I was stuck dealing with legal fees, a looming criminal record, and the humiliation of having to explain to potential employers why I had charges pending. Any real job would require a background check, and having an arrest record made everything infinitely more complicated. The whole situation ruined my reputation in our social circle completely. Once the story about the vandalism got out, and it did get out, most of our mutual friends took his side. They said I'd crossed a line, that I was unstable, and that my actions had proven he was right to end things with me. I felt like everyone was against me, judging me for fighting back when I'd been the one who was wronged in the first place. He lied to me by setting up that fake account. He violated my privacy. He humiliated me by showing my content to his mother. He threw me out on the street. But somehow, I was the villain. Now, I'm stuck living with my parents indefinitely, struggling to rebuild my finances while dealing with ongoing legal issues. I'm branded. Damaged. Meanwhile, Grant got to play the victim and move on with his perfect life like nothing ever happened. I lost everything: the relationship, the future I had planned, my savings, my reputation, and my independence. All because I made the mistake of falling for a man who couldn't handle the truth. He could have just broken up with me like a normal person. He could have had some compassion. But he chose to be vindictive and cruel, and in the end, I'm the one left paying the price for his decision to destroy my life. It's just not fair.